All right. So the US judicial system is back at it again, seemingly infinitely capable of finding new and innovative ways to screw over average working class people while protecting the interests of the wealthy. So here from Forbes, and shout out to a friend of the show, Kyle Kalinske, for pointing this article out. They say here, court blocks new student loan forgiveness rules in latest setback for Biden. So this isn't actually talking about, the main pushback from the Supreme Court where they dismantled Biden's plan for student loan forgiveness, which was like the $10,000 or the $20,000, depending on whether or not you're a Pell Grant recipient. This is an entirely different thing, and it actually has to do with scam for-profit colleges. And surprise, surprise, again, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in this instance is siding on the side of the scam for-profit colleges. So they say here, a federal appeals court has halted new regulations designed to make it easier for borrowers who were defrauded by their school to receive student loan forgiveness. Okay, emphasis here on the defrauded, right? We're not talking about people who just took out a loan by their own volition and then, now they're lazy and they don't want to pay it back or something like that. No, we're talking about literally situations where students were scammed, where they were lied to by these for-profit colleges, and this Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit, which is notoriously right-wing and conservative, they are saying, no, you have to pay back the people who scammed you, the people who defrauded you, okay? It's a completely insane situation here, but they say the Borrower Defense to Repayment is a federal student debt relief program for borrowers who were misled by their educational institution. If a school induces a student to enroll in a program through misrepresentations or lies about key aspects of the program, such as career prospects, earning potential, admissions selectivity, or the transferability of credits, a borrower can then potentially qualify for this program and get some of that student loan forgiveness. They say the Borrower Defense Program has been the subject of numerous political and legal battles since a formal application process was first established under the Obama administration in the wake of several high-profile collapses for international for-profit college chains that were accused of widespread misconduct. Then, the Education Department, under Donald Trump, rewrote the borrower defense regulations and enacted new policies designed to limit student debt relief under the program. Thank you, Trump administration. They say at the same time, hundreds of thousands of borrowers saw their requests for student loan forgiveness stalled or rejected, leading to a class action lawsuit that only recently settled. And we're going to circle back around here to the Trump administration and specifically who he chose to lead the Education Department, this evil motherfucker, Betsy DeVos. And we'll get into some of the details about her background and why this undercutting of this student loan forgiveness program actually happened under the Trump administration. But they say the Biden administration, okay, after Trump gutted this rule, he then rewrote this borrower defense regulations again, this time to broaden access to student debt relief under the program. The new rules, which went into effect on July 1st, expanded the categories of school misconduct that can be the basis for borrower defense relief, including relaxed time limits for submitting applications and eased the process for the Education Department implementing relief for groups of similarly situated borrowers. Okay, so a somewhat good thing there from the Biden administration. Now, obviously, I'm in favor of him just wiping the debt slate clean regardless, not just for some small niche group of people who were straight up defrauded. I mean, obviously, those people do deserve to not have to pay back the people who scammed and defrauded them, but this should be something that is widespread across the entirety of everybody who has student debt right now. But they say here, the appeals court halts this student debt forgiveness. So they say on Monday, a federal appeals court issued a nationwide injunction blocking the implementation of Biden's new set of rules on this, the borrower defense. And they say the Fifth Circuit of Appeals, viewed as one of the most conservative federal circuit courts in the country. I mean, this is where a lot of conservative groups that are trying to undo either, liberal policies that have been implemented under the Biden administration or under the Obama administration or whatever the case may be, this is the place that they typically try to get those lawsuits handled because they know how right-wing and how biased and how skewed in favor of the wealthy the Fifth Circuit of Appeals Court actually is. But they say that they said little of substance in their brief order, but appeared to agree with legal arguments made by a coalition of dozens of for-profit colleges that the schools could suffer irreparable harm as a result of the new borrower defense regulations. Think about that. That's the argument that this Fifth Circuit of Appeals Court decided to side with, right? They're siding with these for-profit scam colleges because they're saying, oh, it's going to cause irreparable harm to us. maybe it should. Maybe you shouldn't be defrauding and scamming and lying to these students in the first place. Maybe that would prevent you from suffering from irreparable harm, right? But they continue. They say the coalition of schools had argued that the Biden administration had overreached and violated federal law in enacting the new rules. Advocacy groups for borrowers were critical of the ruling. They say, quote, this unexplained order from the Fifth Circuit, which is also just amazing, right? Apparently they didn't even really give many details. They just kind of like did this, and they were like, okay, we're kind of just by default. In the meantime, before we make a final ruling on this, we're just going to, stop these, stop the forgiveness going out and just temporarily side with these scam for-profit colleges, right? But they say the unexplained order from the Fifth Court is a gift to those who wish to operate predatory education schemes with impunity. Borrower defense is an essential safeguard that has been in place for decades. It is necessary to protect students from being scammed, and it ensures that predatory actions come to light and are stopped before they go on to harm more students, said Eileen Connor, the president and director of the Project on Predatory Student Lending. And she says these organized, well-funded political attempts to weaponize the court system against the legal rights of borrowers underscore how stacked the system is against our clients. And that, obviously applies broadly, again, to the entirety of the American judicial system. I mean, this is what the purpose is. It is to defend the wealthy. And obviously we have like two sets of different rules for people who are working class and people who are, extremely wealthy, or if you're a corporation. I mean, a lot of these courts are there in place to side with their interests in moments like this, right? This is just how the entirety of our judicial system, similar to our economic system, similar to how our political system is structured, okay? But they finish off here. They say, putting this into like a broader context in terms of student debt and where it's at right now, they say the brief order from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is not the final word on the new borrower defense regulations. The court will consider additional legal arguments before making a ruling on whether to permanently block the rules. But the issuance of the preliminary injunction gives the indication that basically it looks like they're going to side with these scam for-profit colleges. And they say if they're struck down, essentially it's not going to completely eliminate this borrower defense program in its entirety. It's just going to revert back to what it was under the Donald Trump administration, which, as a reminder, was the gutted and watered down version of this program that was supposed to help students who got scammed by these colleges. And so again, why did this happen under the Trump administration? Well, obviously Trump was putting people in positions of power within his administration where it seemed like their only goal was to dismantle the agency that they were a part of. I mean, you could talk about like the EPA, you could talk about like the FDA, you could talk about, for example, the education department led by Betsy DeVos. And it seems like, again, they were just trying to take a wrecking ball to these institutions. And that is part of the broader Republican agenda. That's part of their broader goals. I mean, look at what Donald Trump is running on right now for his 2024 campaign. Half of it is literally just about dismantling all of these federal agencies, right? This is, again, a part of trying to benefit corporate America as best as they possibly can and try to remove any sort of accountability or any sort of rules and regulations that could be a check on the capitalist system. Betsy DeVos is a perfect example of that. So they say here from The Guardian, and I'll link this down below if you want to go read through the entirety of it, but here from David Smith, and this is a couple of years old, but it's just an insight into who she is and how she actually is directly tied to some of these scam for-profit colleges. So he says, Betsy DeVos, the billionaire Republican destroying public education. So they say a billionaire philanthropist, going to put that in air quotes, Betsy DeVos, age 61, attended a private Christian school in Michigan and sent most of her children to private Christian schools. She has had little exposure to public education. She became a champion of privately run, publicly funded charter schools and vouchers that enable families to take tax dollars from the public education system to the private sector. They say since taking office, she has proposed billions of dollars of cuts in her own department, hitting class size reductions, after school programs, full-service community schools, and student loan forgiveness. Even Trump overruled her on plans to gut the Special Olympics. She wanted to gut the Special Olympics. I mean, just a full-blown demon. And she was recently run into opposition from the Democratic-controlled House, which passed significant budget increases. They say here, from a quote from Weingarten, here you have somebody whose job it is to help students, 90% of whom go to public schools in America, and to help students in higher education navigate through their student debt or to try to mitigate it. She's failed on both accounts. Instead, she's tried to defund and dismantle public education and make it harder for us to help kids in public education. And they finish off here. They say DeVos is currently attacking a program, which we just talked about, known as the Borrower Defense to Repayment, intended to forgive federal student loans for those who went to colleges who were scamming them and lying to them, and other otherwise committing fraud. And they say the program was expanded under Obama, but DeVos had been accused of stalling it for more than a year while she altered the rules that made it harder for students to get the loan relief, resulting in a large backlog. So she seems to be largely to blame for the gutting of these rules under the Trump administration. And here you go. They say last month, a federal judge held DeVos in contempt. It held Betsy DeVos in contempt of court for violating an order to stop collecting loan payments from former Corinthian College students, a for-profit college chain that collapsed in 2015 amid allegations that it lied about the success of its graduates in order to get students to enroll. So you have somebody who is like quite literally profiting, okay, personally benefiting from these scam colleges continuing to get payments from the students who they scammed. And then she is behind the scenes working the rules around to try to make it more difficult for those students to get student loan relief. I mean, again, it's just massive levels of corruption. And the reason why I put this in perspective for you guys and go to an article that's like 3 years old is because it's a representative of like what a second Trump administration would actually get us. Now, I don't know if he would put Betsy DeVos back in this position or anything like that, but this is the ideology of the Republican Party, right? It is trying to dismantle every single public institution, every federal agency that could possibly be a check on the capitalist system, and to, I guess, in their mind, like cut the red tape or whatever the case is and unleash the market. Essentially just Reaganism. I mean, essentially just the same old, trickle down economics that has failed the American people for decades and decades and decades, right? So, don't buy into anybody who is trying to convince you that like Trump is some sort of like economic populist and he's, actually going to stand on the side of working class people. No, he's a billionaire. He is an elitist. He will fuck you over any chance that he can possibly get. And he will put people in the highest positions of government that will also try to fuck you over at every chance that they get, right? So I want to finish off here with some new data that I actually just saw come across today. Yeah, this is a new article published on August 13th here at the time of recording. So this is giving us an insight in terms of where we're at right now with some of these student debt repayments and how it seems like a large chunk, if not the outright majority, of people who do have student debt won't be able to pay it when the payments start resuming. Now, keep in mind, we still do have some sort of an ongoing fight. Biden is trying to, go through the process of potentially using like the 1965 Higher Education Act to try to get his original student loan plan back up and running after it was, the original version of it with the, COVID justification was struck down by the Supreme Court. So he's still trying to work, I guess, kind of to, get some of that relief. But again, his plan isn't even to wipe the debt slate clean. His plan, is better, obviously, than nothing, but it's still up in the air whether or not even that like neoliberal, centrist, half-assed, measure that he wants to put in place is even going to happen. And so in all reality, this is what's going to happen, more likely than not. They say when student loan repayments resume, 56% of borrowers say that they'll have to choose between their debt and buying groceries. Okay. Now, I mean, obviously, like, an economy is just a reflection of how we want to structure society, right? What are our morals? What are our values? What do we want to see the future of this country be? And this is what we're doing to young people in this country, right? We're telling them you have to go and you have to get a higher education in order to be like broadly successful within the economy, right? They go to school and then you're saddling them with all of this massive amount of debt, historically high levels of debt, okay, that many of them will have for the rest of their entire lives, right? And then when somebody tries to, implement some sort of even like milk toast relief to them, the courts are going to side against it. They're going to use whatever legal avenues that they can to, get that struck down. And then we end up with a situation where these people are going to have to start making decisions about whether or not they want to pay for an education that they received or to pay to put food on the table. I mean, this is why we need free universal public colleges in this country, right? No debt. Okay. But I mean, maybe you could make an argument that like, okay, if you want to go get some like fancy, super mega degree or whatever the case may be in some super niche thing, and you want to get some advanced, like master's degree or a doctorate or something like that, maybe you could say, okay, you might have to pay for something. But even on that, I'm not necessarily convinced. I think that all of these, we should be, structuring our society, structuring our economy in a way where going to college, if you want to advance your education, should be something that is publicly available, should be something that is fully covered, because that is actually going to have, positive economic benefits for the entire country if we have an educated populace. But, besides the point, here's the actual reality that we have. They say interest accruals that are set to resume on September 1st and payments that are going to be due in October for the first time in over 3 years. But over half of borrowers, 56%, say that they will be forced to choose between making their loan payment or covering necessities like rent and groceries when the pandemic forbearance ends, according to a new survey by Credit Karma. So 56% of borrowers say they will be forced to choose between paying their student debts or keeping a roof over their head or food on the table. Okay. And I mean, again, keep in mind, this last part here is kind kind of key as well, right? We haven't had these kinds of repayments resuming in over 3 years. And has the American economy collapsed or imploded in on itself? No. So if we can go 3 years without these payments being made, what is the urgency to have these restarted, right? I mean, this is only going to benefit those private actors that are profiting off of this, and they're not providing anything necessarily, right? I mean, again, this is something that could be funded publicly, okay? And then you're not going to have tens of millions of Americans that are saddled with debt for the rest of their lives, right? Much better ways that we could go about doing this than I think, forcing a generation of people to choose between paying down their student debt or putting food on the family or a roof, for their family or a roof over their heads. So, I mean, there you have it. A little bit of an update, a little bit of another insight in terms of how not only our political system, our economic system are screwing over average Americans, but also our judicial system, which is largely just as corrupt as anything else within this country. So, there you have it. We'll obviously have to stay tuned and see if there's some like magic potential, miracle that's going to happen, and this Fifth Circuit of Appeals actually like takes this back and, allows the Biden administration to implement their new rules. But I have my doubts on that. And meanwhile, in the next couple of months, we are going to get to see, some significant economic suffering in this country because we choose to saddle an entire generation of people with completely unnecessary debt.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying